Alright gamers, this year marks 20 years since the release of Guitar Hero, an exclusive to PlayStation 2, and though the franchise hasn't had a new release since 2015, it is still alive and well in the hands of the community through Clone Hero. We might have a PC version that holds the keys to several thousands of songs readily available online, but originally we were stuck, happily mind you, with one setlist of 30 songs in the main setlist and 17 more. Even so, the soundtrack was filled with bangers, and if you're anything like me, it left you with an imprint on your impressionable child brain that sticks with you today as a headbanger metal kid adult thing. Disregarding Guitar Hero Live, which featured the infamous 6-button design we all know and hate, when you look at the last 5-button game released, that being Guitar Hero Warriors of Rock in 2010, compared to what we originally started with in the first Guitar Hero game, the concept is obviously the same. It utilizes the exact same controller design that corresponds with the exact same mechanics of 5 frets, a strum bar, and a whammy bar, with later iterations including the star power button, which was compatible with the old games, and a slide bar at the bottom of the neck, which was unusable in the older games. As time went on, new mechanics were obviously added, which kinda makes the first Guitar Hero a bit charming, as it's so innocent and plain, but it's still the roots of everything. Every note in the original was either a strum note or a hammer-on / pull-off. More on that later. Since, starting with Guitar Hero World Tour, often referred to as Guitar Hero 4, added the strum-only note, a purple bar that spanned the highway, as well as tap notes, which were, as the name implies, notes you only needed to tap. These didn't require you to strum or have an existing note streak in order to hit them. This allowed the developers to make blistering fast solos more realistic and skill-based, while also making you look like a total badass while doing it. With all these notes in mind, going back to my comment on pull-offs, these were the bane of my existence and many others, I imagine, especially if you never started with the first Guitar Hero game. Because pull-offs are exactly like hammer-ons, not requiring a strum, and having the same appearance of the bigger white head on the note, but it required an extra move, and on higher difficulties, it made it really hard to pull off correctly. No pun intended. These pull-offs differed in the sense that you had to literally hold the previous note at the same time as the next one in order to successfully hit it. It wasn't nearly as simple as hammer-ons, where you can just tap it when it crosses. You had to drag your finger and hold it in place, watch yourself hit the pull-off note, and then move on, probably with more exactly like it to follow. This is a technique a lot of the older players have no problem with, but given this is unique to the first Guitar Hero game only, it's sort of an irrelevant feature, forgotten about as a skill and concept. And I mean, seriously, if you go and look at like forum posts from like 20 years ago on GameFAQs or whatever, or you look at an instructional video on how to do it, it's all these old people going like, hey, it's not really that hard, you just gotta get good. So, who cares anymore, right? I personally never really got the hang of it as a kid, and kinda just gave up on learning it because it just never worked for me. I always assumed it was just a bad mechanic or a massive developer oversight or failure, but reading up on it, I learned it was just a skill I wasn't good at. I shit you not, I literally only got the hang of this concept just a little bit when I did a playthrough of this game for this video, and when I did, I'd get a few, then proceed to mess up the next few. Just like I did as a kid, I kinda just abandoned trying to learn how to do these pull-offs and strum the notes, sacrificing my accuracy score just to get through the song. I stopped caring really quick into this playthrough with it. Frustrating, but hey. The developers knew about it being a problematic feature and fixed it in Guitar Hero 2, thankfully, because that game's soundtrack was a hell of a lot more fiery in terms of the solos. One of the other feature changes, though this was mirrored in Guitar Hero 2, Encore Rocks the 80s, and 3, was the lack of being able to extend star power sequences. In the original 3 games, your star power was what it was. You either used it when it was half, 3/4, or fully filled, and that was as long as it was. In future iterations, we had the added feature of being able to see and hit other star power sequences that would otherwise be covered up by the existing star power sequence. This is obviously a welcome feature change, but at least in the original Guitar Hero, the score counter compensates for this and generally spaces out the star power sequences to make it possible to build after each usage, kind of putting the player in control of their own destiny. You have no idea how many times I had to re-record because I couldn't say star power sequence correctly. Now moving on and looking at the controller, we were given one option and one option only with the original game, that being the wired black Gibson SG controller, manufactured by Red Octane. Obviously, with the game aging and not being available since the mid-2000s, these are getting even more scarce as time goes by, so if you're like me, you take great care of your controllers. If you don't, pause the video right now and put it somewhere safe already. The game, of course, doesn't require you to use this specific controller, as any controller is compatible, provided it's the same system, obviously. Transitioning now to the heart of the game, let's now look at the first setlist we were given for Guitar Hero, which set the tone moving forward, providing us with bangers after bangers, almost all of which in the main setlist you likely had some familiarity with going into it. Looking at the setlist, at the time, it was a solid mix of classic rock and classic metal, mixed with modern rock, packaged in order, kind of creating a vibe with every different stage. It's worth noting too that Guitar Hero only had 6 stages, which was uncommon, as in Guitar Hero 2 it was changed to 8, which was echoed in Guitar Hero 3, and from there it became much bigger with World Tour and beyond. Another thing is that there are no encores in this game. You're given all 5 of the songs right away, and you can choose the order you want. You don't get to unlock an unknown song like in the future titles. The quote-unquote storyline of Guitar Hero is following a cover band that gets insanely popular, starting from playing house shows in a dank basement to playing stadiums. A stylistic choice the developers chose for the early games, plus also to aid in song quality and mapping, was to actually remake the songs in the game, which is why they don't match the masters you'd hear on the radio or streaming services today. The recording company Wave Group was tasked with covering all of the songs, which is seen in the game's extra movies you could purchase in the in-game store. If you got a second later, these videos are readily available on YouTube, and they're quite fascinating if I do say so myself. Wave Group enlisted many different musicians with different backgrounds to make it happen. Looking at the Wave Group versions, most are pretty close. Some fall flatter than others, though. They didn't force it either, thankfully, as if you ever noticed, one example would be Spanish Castle Magic by Jimi Hendrix, where the song in-game is purely an instrumental, as Wave Group never did a strong imitation of Hendrix's voice, and they cut the vocals entirely instead. Part of the reason they sound so close to the actual masters is because they went out of their way to try to use the exact equipment that the artist used on the masters. I read a story one time that Wave Group went as far as to find the exact same fan that Ozzy Osbourne spoke through on Iron Man through Craigslist, and that's why it sounds very similar vocally in the Wave Group cover. Beyond the main set list, there is a set of bonus songs, all of which have their own masters, most of which featuring local bands from the New England area, some even featuring the game developers themselves. I really gotta respect that move for gaming this system in order to promote your band. That's pretty sick. In addition to these, the game featured the band Graveyard Barbecue for their song Cheat on the Church. Graveyard Barbecue being included after winning a competition dubbed the Be a Guitar Hero contest, a submission-based competition. Looking at the list, you'd probably find many bands unknown, save for Black Label Society, but if you never played them, it's worth going through. Most of the songs there aren't really that bad. Now to focus on the main set list, we start with Stage 1, taking place at a basement house show, implied to take place in Detroit, Michigan. This being the first level, it features easier songs, especially I Love Rock and Roll by Joan Jett and the Blackhearts, and the rest being mostly repetitious in nature to help you build your confidence. These include Thunder Kiss 65 by White Zombie, Infected by Bad Religion, I Wanna Be Sedated by the Ramones, and of course, the cover band / Guitar Center classic Smoke on the Water by Deep Purple. The second venue is the Freak Pit, where you are entered into a battle of the bands as revealed in the multiplayer, for which you obviously win. The set list here is a bit odd too, featuring 2 songs from the 70s, 2 songs from the 80s, and a song that would have been new at the time. The 70s selections feature rock and metal with More Than a Feeling by Boston and Iron Man by Black Sabbath, respectively. Giving us our first real guitar solo experience, we are given You Got Another Thing Comin' by Judas Priest and Sharp Dressed Man by ZZ Top. Lastly, we are also given Take Me Out by Franz Ferdinand to round it off. The third stage is at the Red Octane Club, which also gets utilized in Guitar Hero 2. The setlist features 2 older songs with entirely different vibes, but is centered by modern rock of the early 2000s, save for Incubus, featuring rather unknown bands for the time. These 2000s selections being Stellar by Incubus, Heart Full of Black by Burning Brides, and Hey You by the Exies. The other two being light rock Killer Queen by Queen and the thrash metal song Symphony of Destruction by Megadeth, cutting out the choir intro. Moving on to Stage 4, the Republic Theater, located downtown. With the exception of one classic rock song, it is entirely based on alternative rock. Starting light with Ziggy Stardust by David Bowie, it gets heavier from there, featuring Unsung by Helmet, Cochise by Audioslave, Fat Lip by Sum 41, and Take It Off by the Donnas. One of the best mixes, in my opinion. Stage 5 brings us to the very clear interpretation of Warped Tour they call Toxic Summerfest. Luckily, in Guitar Hero 2, licensing and naming rights allowed us to actually virtually play on Warped Tour, as Vance was obviously happy to slap their name on the game after Guitar Hero 1's success. This is definitely my personal favorite setlist in the game, perhaps in the entire series, as it's a hell of a mix spanning from the 60s to the 2000s. The songs feature classic rock songs from the 60s, being an instrumental version of Spanish Castle Magic by Jimi Hendrix and Crossroads by Cream, which, fun fact, was never actually recorded in the studio, making Wave Group's cover differ from its source material, which is kinda cool. We have a cover song in here too, being the Red Hot Chili Peppers cover of Stevie Wonder's song Higher Ground. Also included is Ace of Spades by Motorhead and No One Knows by Queens of the Stone Age, giving it some modern rock representation. The last stage, titled The Garden, which features the hardest songs in the game, comprised of solo-filled classic rock songs exclusively. Though it's slightly wrong for them, Frankenstein by the Edgar Winter Group is included, despite some of the parts you play actually being done on keyboards, but it's still really cool. We do get to be bluesy for once, playing Texas Flood by Stevie Ray Vaughan, before hitting the hard rock and metal with Godzilla by Blue Oyster Cult, Cowboys from Hell by Pantera, and Bark at the Moon by Ozzy Osbourne, which is meant to be the final song you play. By completing this setlist, you float above everyone and become immortalized as a Guitar Hero. Looking back at it, 20 years later, just like all of the Guitar Hero games, it holds up. It's a bit rough around the edges and quirky, but I'd write it off as it was the first test for the developers to build the game. At the end of the day, Guitar Hero was through and through a video game development experiment, making a rhythm game with a specific peripheral controller in mind, and featuring for the most part A-list licensed songs. The songs alone might have been enough to attract some customers, but obviously too, the game became a massive party hit. I don't know about you, but I still play Guitar Hero to this day with friends. It's still as fun as it was back then. The game created a phenomenon, which of course has to have its share of clones that created competition and sadly oversaturation, which led to the demise of the series. Back in late 2023, we did get a little tease from Activision about a possible revival of the series, as Activision CEO, the lovely Bobby Kotick, stated that it was thrown around during a meeting back then. I would say, if anything, if it does get revived, they should know that a new controller is a bad idea and to return to the original 5-button style. Hopefully patents don't get in the way, but if it does, Activision can obviously pay for that licensing, and they'd better. I would say too, as this is the subject of the video, 2025 is 20 years since the release of the game, so if it were to be announced or even released, it probably would be this year. I can't say for certain, I'm just a dude on the internet, but that's my guess. All of this said, I hope this look back on the first Guitar Hero game was as enjoyable as it was for me to go back and play it. The game is obviously still alive and well, but hey, who's to say that it'll remain the community's job or not? In some ways, hopefully it is, to avoid all corporate nonsense. Anyway, that's all for today. My name is Invoyans. Take care.